These are but a few of the hundreds of men who were flogged at Port Arthur. And for such minor infractions as dropping his plate of food accidentally, fighting with another convict, falling asleep at his work after having been ill for 3 days. This man created a disturbance in the bakehouse, and this one spat on the ground near a guard. I wonder why. And for all the days of their lives, these men who had been whipped like animals would carry the effects of those floggings, deep, livid scars on their backs, and hatred and rebellion in their hearts. When Captain O'Hara Booth was the commandant of my prison colony at Port Arthur, a new departure was begun, a special settlement called Point Poor.
Yes, I established Point Poor for delinquent boys between the ages of 7 and 17. 600 of the young rogues were brought from all over the British Isles. Orphans, street urchins, thieves, and pickpockets. And some lads whose sordid young lives had already been touched by violence and bloodshed. Some we had to flog, here. And some we shackled in these underground cells, those who were hardened criminals even at such a tender age.
But a few, Captain Booth, unfortunately could not endure the hard life and the bullying of the guards, and in desperation they would leap to their deaths from this point. It's still known as Suicide Cliffs.
Looking back now, however, perhaps the end justified the means. This new land of Australia benefited from the fresh blood and energies of these youngsters.
But the cost, the cruelty, Captain Booth. Floggings and underground cells for young boys. But still more prisoners came to me, each new ship bringing weary, exhausted, and frightened men and boys to my shores. 8 months on board ship in cramped, subhuman confinement left many of them mere skeletons with shattered nervous systems. And there were some, inevitably, who never survived the voyage. They were buried at sea with no ceremony and little fuss, food for the rapacious sharks who soon learned to follow the convict ships. And some who arrived were political prisoners, banished because their views clashed with those of the Crown. One such person lived in this cottage, the Irish rebel leader, William Smith O'Brien.
I, the O'Brien, lived in this quaint domicile for many a year. Not a convict, mind you, but a political transportee, they called it. Originally, they planned to hang me, along with several of my friends, Mahar, McManus, O'Donoghue, and the like. But a bit of a bribe here and there, and more than a bit of influence spread about, and well, here I landed. From my piazza here, I could look down below and contemplate the scene. It looked so different then. Hundreds of poor devils slogging about in their leg irons, accepting the abuse of those dastardly warders, most of whom had been convicts themselves shortly before. And for those hot-tempered lads who fought back, they soon felt the bite of the cat, I can tell you. 'Twas a scene to make a man's heart grieve.
All transportees weren't so fortunate as Smith O'Brien. Most were to become convicts in the true sense of the word, and of these, many of the difficult cases ended up working in my coal mines, where they served their time at hard labor. 12 hours of every day the prisoners worked and slaved, wearing leg irons and closely guarded by the warders. And then herded back to these cells, where again they might be chained to the walls. Back-breaking labor. too little air and sunshine, and even the hardiest began to fall. The more dangerous of the convicts were kept here, underground. Imagine, no beds, no hammocks to sleep in, only a dirty blanket on an earthen floor, and a cell 3 feet by 7 feet 6 inches. No light and little air. And any complaints brought bread and water diets and lashes of the cat of nine tails. All around one could see beautiful, inspirational scenery, but within the camp itself, living death. Surely a creation of the devil in the hands of sadists.
I, Colonel Arthur, governor of this territory, do declare that our administration of the penal settlement at Port Arthur is to be just, humane, and Christian in its concept. Discipline is to be maintained, certainly, but above all, our purpose is to rehabilitate these prisoners.
Wherein did it go amiss, Governor? Wherein? After my walls at Port Arthur were abandoned and the mines were closed, an underground fire broke out here in the shaft, and it burned for some 80 years, unchecked. Who knows? Perhaps it burns still deep in the bowels of the earth, a grim reminder of the hell that once existed here. In the mid-1840s, a directive came out of England to tighten the discipline on the prisoners and to begin to exact punishment along more scientific lines. A model prison, where flogging, for example, was abolished. Built on a plan of a cartwheel lying flat on its side, this prison was dedicated to one mode of punishment only: absolute solitude. Absolute silence. And a diet of bread and water, just enough to keep a man alive. A prisoner having been sentenced is brought to the model prison, or the silent prison as it is called. Then as the gate opens and he is roughly pushed inside, the world of comparative freedom ends, and one of harsh reality begins. What did one see? An unadorned corridor, for that was what existed here at that time, a corridor from which 3 doors exited. One to a guard room on the right, one to the chief warder's office on the left, and one to the dreaded cells beyond. Then the prisoner is escorted to the chief warder.
Delivering convict Thomas Bates, sir.
Bates, eh? Oh, yes, I have the papers here. Striking an officer. 14 days in the light cells on 1 pound of bread, 1/2 gallon of water per day, absolute silence. Oh, very well, Warder. Put on his hood. God keep you, Bates.
And wearing a hood to the shoulders, with only slits for eyes to see directly ahead, convict Bates is led to his cell, where except for 1 hour daily in a solitary exercise yard, wearing his hood and forbidden to speak, he remains.